We're live. Are we live? We are
We're
live.
live.
Okay. Whew. All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jess. It's good to hang out again for a little bit to chit chat and answer some questions as well. Good. Okay. So if anyone is live, welcome. And what we'll do is, so Jess and I are going to talk a little bit about clinical trials, clinical research, all the things, we're involved in and so on. And as we're talking, whoever can think of questions, please put questions into the comments so they will pop up here. And then at some point, we'll just switch over and try to answer some questions. So good. All right. So maybe just in case somebody doesn't know who we are, I'm Thomas Weimbs, professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, and also the president of Santa Barbara Nutrients. And Jess is.
I am. Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm excited to talk about this. So, a renal dietitian by trade, but I am the president and founder of Kidney Nutrition Institute, which has been one of the central places where we developed plant-focused keto. So, and I've been doing a lot of work there.
Super. Yeah. So, and we have been, we connected, I don't know how long is it now, almost 3 years ago, maybe, way back then, after we, published some papers on polycystic kidney disease and how dietary interventions might be beneficial. Jess found out about them, came all the way over to Santa Barbara, and we hatched out a plan to actually do something about it, and not only keep things in the animal realm and try to cure rats and mice, but actually do something about it to actually translate things into clinical practice. And this led to the the creation of the Ren.Nu program that some of you might know. And now we're very busy trying to actually do clinical trials to look at long-term outcomes, quantify outcomes, look at feasibility, tolerability, safety, but also efficacy. What is the improvement in all kinds of things, including kidney function, total kidney volume, but also things like pain, general health and well-being, and so on.
Yep. Yeah, it's been fun. I don't come from like a deep research background like you. And so for us as dietitians, it's been a great experience because we have really learned a lot about research and definitely have shifted. Our focus has always just been on like, do the therapy, learn the therapy, make the therapy work. And our focus has been able to shift and be able to understand better how important it is to do these clinical trials, publish papers, like really be noticed, because that's ultimately what ends up driving it into the common practice, conventional practice with physicians and other dietitians.
Right. Yeah. Hello, Captain Steve. Good to see you there. Well, let's talk about different levels of clinical evidence, let's say, right? So I think that some, lots of people are always very confused about it, and it is actually really complicated. Maybe so, as a practitioner, right? So let's say a dietitian like Jess Saville, right? So Jess in the US, dietitians, registered dietitians are actual practitioners, that can just on their own treat people, work with people, make them better. And that's, the same for medical doctors and so on. As a practitioner, I think the goal in life should always be to make their patients better or make them less worse. There is kind of textbook knowledge that you get in medical school, but then there's also clinical experience, right? So if somebody has been a dietitian for, a decade or so and has worked with hundreds and hundreds of people with chronic kidney disease, you would expect that they're sort of start knowing what works for their patients and what doesn't work. And then they can change their approach accordingly. And that doesn't need, you don't need a clinical trial for that to tell you that, because you see these patients every day. Is that right, Jess? Is this kind of how you start?
Yeah, I mean, all clinicians will say they practice evidence-based medicine, right? Evidence-based medicine. And different people in our profession understand that in different ways, even though it has been defined, at least by our professional organization, what that means. I mean, like and I really prefer that you speak to those levels here in just a second, but like as a clinician, if there's a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, that's the gold standard. The reality, though, is to get a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, especially in nutrition where there are so many variables, is pretty unrealistic to get that type of trial done. And so as clinicians, and we're, even in the nutrition world, the research can be kind of all over the map. We take our best understanding of physiology, our best understanding of, pathways in the body, and apply that for each patient on an individual basis, really trying to understand what's going on with disease states, and then seeing, what happens for patients. And to me, that is as much evidence-based, as long as, and here's where it can get tricky sometimes for clinicians, as long as clinicians do not become dogmatic in their approach and they don't start developing confirmation bias, which is so easy to do in the nutrition world. But I mean, that's how we look at it at KNI, and that's why for us, looking at a ketogenic diet to start with, for me was really important, because I was like, hey, like this isn't being done, but it seems reasonable, we should try. And what happens if you don't try? What's the alternative? And is it actually not safe? So that's kind of where our thought process comes. But there's a lot of different levels of evidence, and I have found the longer that I'm in practice, the more and more I value being able to understand those different levels of evidence, and kind of picking through the science and the statistics that so you can understand, where's the truth at, what are things that are wise for us to pursue. If we're going to pursue something, what should we be cautious of? And those are all things that go through our mind.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I actually just had I've done an interview with Eric Westman just a few days ago.
Yeah.
He's a professor at Duke University and one of the leading researchers in the sort of low carb and ketogenic metabolic therapy space. Published tons of papers. Really terrific scientist, and we were also chatting about exactly that. Right. So if you have, if you're looking at a disease where nobody gets better, right? So it could be like a deadly infectious disease, where everybody dies, essentially. The level of success evidence, so to speak, that you need is pretty small. If everybody dies and you manage to get a few people to survive by whatever you do, that becomes really hard evidence, right? So you don't need a clinical trial with 1,000 people. You don't have to have 1,000 people die before you can prove that something actually works, right? So if something is very effective in a disease that usually doesn't improve with whatever the standard of care is, very quickly you can establish enough evidence with even in the absence of a randomized, control, blinded clinical trial. So this is just essentially practical experience that factors in. And then those, so if somebody as a practitioner has a case like that, this will be a case study. So you can publish a paper, and it's called a case study, right? So you say, as a doctor, let's say, you say, hey, I've practiced, medicine in my discipline for 20 years. I've treated, 100 patients with this condition. They all got worse and nobody ever got better until I started to treat, a couple of people with such and such, whatever it is, let's say dietary intervention such and such, and miraculously they are improved. And here's my case report. So they would describe what it is that they did, published it in the scientific literature. That gives other doctors a chance to pick up on this and say, let me try this as well. So that's kind of almost like the first level of scientific evidence. It's essentially anecdotal evidence that just gets published in the literature, right? Case studies. The next level up is sort of a case series where as a doctor practitioner, you have like a whole series of patients where you do the same intervention. And this could be like 10 people or even 20 or 50 people, where essentially you do whatever you think is right, and you report on this in a paper. And that's a case series study. So we have published something like this. Actually, let me pull this up for everyone to see. I'm actually not totally sure how to share my screen, if I even can. Oh, maybe I can. Let me see. I hit a button, share screen. All right, let's see. This may or may not work. Can you see anything, Jess?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so we published a case series study. First author was Sebastian Strubel from my lab. This came out pretty recently, like a year-ish, a year and a half ago or so, in Clinical Kidney Journal, where we this is a retrospective case series study where we identified about I think 131 patients that with polycystic kidney disease that have been on a ketogenic diet, essentially on their own, and there's a lot of self-reported data in there, but also hard data from the labs of those patients and so on. But this was a retrospective, which means we didn't plan for these people to be on a ketogenic diet. They did it on their own, and we just looked at later on. Once they were into it for about half a year, what happened to them? How did their labs improve? How did their pain levels improve, and so on? So that's it's a clinical study, but it's not a randomized controlled study. But there was no control group here. Practitioners would say, okay, it's evidence. It's not the strongest evidence yet because there can be lots of biases there when patients would have self-selected into the study and so on. Yeah. All right. You see how
when I see something like that as a clinician, I say, okay, well, did it work for some people? And then that's where you should start questioning why, right? Like you're right, like there is definitely bias in that because it's self-reported. So I can't necessarily extrapolate, say, oh, okay, gonna work for everyone. But I can look at it and say, well, how come it worked for these people, right? That was the first question I had. How come it worked for these people, and why? What did they do? And why were they having improvements? And you start asking a lot of questions as a clinician, which should help you start, thinking about your own patients, being like, would my patients, like, is that something that could be safe for them? And if we don't have other options, could we try that? Because it did work for somebody. So, and more than one, you had quite a few people in that retrospective trial. So like, that's when I look at case series, I understand there's bias, so I know I can't extrapolate it everybody, but I still want to ask, well, why did it work for this person? And you do that even with case studies, right? Why did it work for this person? Like, what was unique about that? What did they theorize with the pathways that were impacted? And that's always how I look at it. Like, what did they do and why did it work?
Yeah. Okay. There's also one really important distinction. Drug trials versus not drug trials. Not a drug trial would be just like a dietary intervention trial and so on we're talking about here. There is actually like a whole different formal process for drug trials. And maybe just to explain the distinction there, I actually happen to be, I'm chairing the pharmacology committee in my department. So we have a pharmacology major, so where I'm teaching pharmacology classes, and so I know a thing or two about how these drug trials work. And there is a very formal process, here in the US. It goes in phases. There's a phase 1 trial, which is a safety trial, phase 2, which is an initial efficacy trial, a phase 3, it is a much larger efficacy trial. And so the reason why it's so formalized is because it has to be submitted then to the FDA, right? The Food and Drug Administration, which is in charge of approving drugs. And what a drug is usually a novel substance, a chemical compound most of the time that doesn't necessarily exist in nature. Some drugs can be naturally derived, but most of the time, I think it's something that has come out of a lab, out of a research lab, and nobody has any clue, how safe it could be, right? So there will be animal data, so we know, how much it takes to kill a mouse, but it can be very different in humans, and the FDA is completely right. They want safety data first, right? So that's where phase 1 trial comes in. The phase 1 trial is a small trial. Maybe you have like 20 patients or so. 20 people, not actually patients. It's usually done on just regular healthy people, and they get that drug, injected, ingested, whatever it is. And you look for side effects, and you look for safety, and at what point does it become toxic? So that's what a phase 1 trial is. A phase 2 trial is then once you have passed phase 1 and it's reasonably safe, you go into a larger number of, in this case, the patients, and you see whether there's any efficacy, right? Whether there's any benefit. And you still, of course, look at safety. So if there is an efficacy signal, that is a good news, because then the company can go on to the phase 3 trial, which is a much larger study. Maybe now you have hundreds of patients in there, and you do kind of the same study, see is it efficacious. If it is, finally the drug company can submit all of this to the FDA and say, here's our evidence, and this all has to be done placebo-controlled, randomized, double-blind usually. So it's a very formal process. And then eventually the FDA might say, okay, approved. The company can then start selling it. And maybe a quiz question. Oh, can we do a quiz question for the audience? What do you all think is the average cost to bring one new drug to the market?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'm wondering what people might guess.
It's a lot.
How much would it be? Is it
more than $1 million for sure?
All right, let's see. Is anyone brave enough to put a comment out there that might a random number? Does it cost $100 to bring one drug out of the market? $1,000, 10,000, 100,000, $1 million? Okay, let's see. We get Nicole T, 500,000. All right, let's see what else we have. Oh, we have Steve. Steve says 5 billion. All right, that's a big difference to 500,000. Let's see. Marianne says 10 million. All right. And we have Heidi saying 3 million. Good. A lot of numbers that differ quite a bit. All right. Shall I reveal it? Yes. So the average cost.
If you go with that, that'll be that down. I'm waiting, right?
The average cost to bring one new drug to the market is $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure who came closest to that. But 1.5 billion with a B, so that's $1,500 million. That's a very large number. So, and that's the reason why drugs cost so much in the end, at the end of the day, because the pharma company has to make that $1.5 billion back in profit plus more on top of that. Good. All right. So that's, however, completely different for something like a diet trial, my dietary intervention, because there's no FDA involved. diets don't have to be approved. There's no FDA approval for dietary interventions. That just doesn't come into play. So there's no phase 1, there's no phase 2, no phase 3, none of that. The trials are completely different. Diet trials cannot, by definition almost, but they cannot have a placebo usually, right? Because what's a placebo for food, right? There's no such thing. And they cannot be blinded because people know what they're eating. So all of these things are out of the window. So diet trials are just very different in their design. All right, good. So let's talk about the trials we're trying to pull off, Jess. So let me share my screen again one more time. We actually already published a paper. And that paper, let me just flash it up on the screen here, if I can. Can you see it?
Yep.
Perfect. So, so I think most people might know about the Ren.Nu program, which is initially designed for people with polycystic kidney disease. Jess is running it with the dietitians in her group, and it's based on the research from my lab, but also many other labs. And this program is up and running. And this paper reported on the sort of qualitative outcomes of a group of about 24 beta testers. So this was not a controlled clinical trial. This is maybe a little bit more similar to a case study. And essentially it describes all the details of the Ren.Nu program and what happened to the first beta testers there. So that's something that's out there. What we're doing now is using that Ren.Nu program and trying to follow up patients for the long term, but for a year. We're planning 2 trials with really leading academic nephrologists and PKD experts. One is Dr. York Pei in Toronto. The other one is Dr. Shigo Hori in Tokyo. And those trials will start, fingers crossed, this year. And one in Toronto will have 40 patients in the intervention group and 40 controls, so 40 plus 40. And the one in Tokyo will have 100 plus 100, so it's larger. Yeah, what do you think about those trials, Jess?
So from a dietitian perspective, being in this industry, I think it says a lot about the researchers and people that are at the forefront of the PKD community, that they're looking for answers to, that they're willing to engage in a dietary intervention program. Nutrition programs are not, nutrition approaches are studied. Nutrition programs where you look at kind of a standardized approach are not studied because there's not so many of them that are kind of common in practice. And so for us, it's a really great opportunity. And I'm really, really happy that there are trials going in place, because this is a new therapy. It typically takes, I think the data is 25 years for an intervention to actually go into practice. Something comes out in the science, it's 25 years later until it's actually being used regularly. I always think the medical world's kind of this very slow moving juggernaut. It doesn't move its head so much. So to be able to move forward on this so quickly, right? Within 2 or 3 years, your paper comes out on the animals. We work on developing approach for humans that we feel is safe and considers the kidneys, that is as closely aligned as we can with current kidney standards. And then to be able to move it into a clinical trial with really incredible researchers, I feel very ethically centered, they're really heart-centered on the solution. And I love that about Dr. Pei and Dr. Horier. But that is so incredible. It's so incredible for the PKD community. It's incredible for us as dietitians to learn and refine this approach, because I definitely do not claim, nor does my organization, to know everything. I always say, and I've said it so many times, I feel like metabolic health and ketogenic diets is the tip of the iceberg, and it will teach us so many other things that we need to know to really be able to get consistent, incredible outcomes. Or if that's all there is to know, and that's like the easiest thing to do, like that would be awesome too. But we want to really know, because it puts a lot of strength behind recommendations, and it allows you to like work from so many different angles. So I mean, I'm excited about both these trials. They're a lot of work to put on. We've had a lot of questions like, how come you guys don't publish all the results from how patients are doing? And some of it is because, you know, that is private patient data and we can't publish all their results without their permission. And so getting a clinical trial where we can look at that is really important. And then moving forward, setting up a structure so that participants in Ren.Nu that want to have their experience move into the scientific literature to be able to influence other people, influence medical professionals, they'll be able to do that too. So all of those things coming together is really, really important to help the PKD community have answers, and as professionals to help us be able to give the best possible recommendations.
Yeah, you said a few, I think, some important things there. Maybe just to re-emphasize them. Sometimes I see, you know, on social media and so on, people are saying, "Whoa, how come you haven't already done all these clinical trials? You know, why is it, you know, not already there?" And I think people may not realize what it takes to do a clinical trial. It's such a monumental undertaking, and so we couldn't just like willy-nilly say, you know, give someone you know, some KetoCitra, here you go, take it for a year and tell me what happened to you, right? So that's not how it works. Right, so you need what's called IRB approval. That's an ethics committee. And you know, so you have to submit your whole trial proposal to them. It's a big deal, you know, it's a long document, lots of details. Experts there review it. They might get back to you and say, "Oh, you know, you got to change these 25 things," and then you have to resubmit it. Of course, it all costs money. And you know, you have to have infrastructure to do a clinical trial. You need like HIPAA compliant databases and things like that, but you can't just simply keep patient data on your little laptop that you bring to the coffee shop or something like that, right? So all of this is a lot more complicated than it might seem to like a lay person. Yeah, go ahead.
I was the other thing that and being part of this, which has been really neat, is watching the discussion on how do we make sure the science is good, and like how are we controlling for variables that might muddy the water? How are we asking the right questions so that we can publish something that's valuable? Those are the most simple part of the trial and the hardest to get right. And so to be able to have researchers with a great track record like you and Dr. Pei, who have, you know, like you guys have asked many questions, you've done many scientific studies, and to be able to bring that into a dietary approach and be able to look at, you know, what happens with Ren.Nu, where we have a dietary approach plus a medical food together, what happens for patients, how do we build the right approach, has been great, because there are a lot of questions and a lot of discussion, and, you know, a little bit of debate about should we include, like, should this type of person come in, or like, what is this going to tell us? And that's been really, really great. And it's a lot of people have come together to make these become possible, and not just anybody, but like really people that want to make a difference and that have a lot of experience. And I think that will bring so much value and quality to the trials as well.
Yeah, excellent. Good. So we have 2 trials lined up with the Ren.Nu program right now, Tokyo and Toronto. Somebody might ask, well, I also often hear, you know, so in the same vein, you know, why haven't you done all these trials? You know, people have to realize, the money has to come from somewhere, funding has to be there.
Expensive.
And
Yeah.
it's been incredibly lucky that for these 2 trials, funding materialized by just like sheer luck, that the investigators there actually had some funding available, and they were so enthusiastic about doing those trials. So that's something in real life that almost pretty much never happens. So this is without that luck, we wouldn't be anywhere near getting those trials up and running. So that's one thing. But we are also planning some smaller, faster trials, right, Jess? So because people have already been going through the Ren.Nu program now, like a year plus already worth of patients that have gone through the program, and those patients have their own data, if you will, and their own experiences. So we're trying to set up a study where we kind of retrospectively ask those patients that have gone through the Ren.Nu program about their experience, like a year into it. And again, this needs ethics board approval. So it's not something that can be done willy-nilly. That has to have a study plan. We have to come up with the questions we want to ask and so on. So it's not something we just pull out of a hat and just do it. So that it's a lot of work and investment. We're also trying to pull off a few additional studies. There's one with Professor Seemann in Austria, Vienna, who is actually happens to be the president of the Austrian Society of Nephrology. So he's a very prominent nephrologist in Europe. So I'm very excited about this. We've been having many meetings with their team. And this would be a shorter term study where we're looking at the kidney stone risk profile in response to taking KetoCitra and being on a ketogenic diet and so on. So fingers crossed we can pull this off. This could lead to more, faster data because we wouldn't have to look at a year follow-up. This would only be a month. So that's in the works. We're talking with Dr. Rich Fatica at the Cleveland Clinic, another top medical place in the world, where we want to look at metabolic effects of the Ren.Nu program. Again, I think very, very important, and this can also be done in a shorter term study. So if this all works out, we could have a short-term study on that subject. So I'm very excited about this. Getting the Cleveland Clinic on board with a clinical trial, that'd be a major thing. I just got off the phone with our friends at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, USC, very famous medical school, the Keck School of Medicine there. The chief of nephrology there, Ken Hollers, has been a long-term friend of mine, and his wife Nuria is actually also a nephrologist there, and we have been working on something completely different, a clinical trial for long COVID, of all things. So has nothing to do per se with polycystic kidney disease, but we're actually testing KetoCitra and low carb diets and long COVID. So after long time of planning, this is now, fingers crossed, taking off, and recruitment can hopefully start pretty soon. So I'm really excited about this. And we have also now been talking about a Ren.Nu trial, and you don't even know this yet, Jess, because I just got off the phone just before we started. So we'll talk about that later. But there may be a chance we could actually apply for an NIH grant to get funding to do a Ren.Nu type trial on polycystic kidney disease at USC. Hopefully.
For those of you who are watching, the takeaway from that should be there is a lot of effort going into driving the science. And Dr. Weimbs, I really have to give you a shout out for that, because I think you cannot help being a scientist in everything you do, which is amazing, right? That's good, because that is exactly what is needed to find the right answers. And this is not something, as dietitians, we want these answers, but we don't have that same like perspective and those like just that drive of like, we can do this. This is how it works, that sort of thing. And so for me, it is just like, I have to give you a huge shout out, and really the PKD community, I feel like should give you a shout out, because you have driven this part of the science, because the science has been, in my opinion, somewhat embedded in like things that are like 20 years off or 30 years off. And those are important to look at, the genetic profiling, like all these other things. Those are still really important because they will drive future therapies. But in 20 years, if I have PKD, I could be on dialysis, and I wouldn't want that, right? And so being able to drive the science now for interventions now cannot be understated. That is so important, and just, I think, really, really huge for anybody that has PKD and is wanting answers and wanting solutions, want to be proactive. So for those of you watching this now or later, like, it is incredible, and you do not see this every day, that Santa Barbara Nutrients and Dr. Weimbs has gotten behind pushing the science and making sure that there is going to be studies on, you know, the theories and what we're thinking will work. And I just, on my side, I just publicly very much commend you for that, because it's so incredible. So incredible.
Well, thank you for saying that. And actually, none of this would have happened without you, because we would have been just stuck at the animal level. So I think that is actually that was a huge thing that you brought to the table, to say, okay, we we know how to treat people with chronic kidney disease, and your science makes sense. Let's see how we can mesh it all together.
So I'm not worried that we'll have plenty of studies in the future.
Right.
I'm definitely not worried about. And I'm glad we have approach. I mean, what Ren.Nu brings to the table is it can kind of standardize that approach. Otherwise, you end up having some variables with how dietitians are administering the therapy. And it does, help define it a little bit. But yeah, it's always good to bring it into actual practice. And yeah.
Right. Okay. Let me just share one more thing to let's see how I do this here. Just to because some people may not have seen this yet. There is a clinical trial we've been involved with, but it was really run. Let me just pull this up here. It was really run by Dr. Roman Muller in Cologne, at the University of Cologne in Germany. And so this trial has just finished. It's not published yet in a peer-reviewed journal, but it has been, the initial results have been presented at Kidney Week, which is a big kidney conference that happened last November in Florida. And it was presented, and the data were presented. The study was really interesting. This is now a prospective study. So this is not a case series study anymore, not a case report. This is an actual, what's called a prospective study, where patients were randomized into 3 groups. And I'm not quite sure, there's not a lot of visuals here, but patients were randomized into 3 groups. Ketogenic diet versus water fasting versus control. So 3 groups, 63 patients altogether, split into 3 groups. And then the question was, how do they go? How do they fare? And what happens to their hard outcomes? Total kidney volume and eGFR. And maybe just focus on one picture here real quick. So this the axis here shows the difference in total kidney volume. So how much did the kidneys grow over the the period of time here, which actually now I'm thinking, how many weeks was this from V2 to 12? I think it's a 3-month period. And in the control group, the kidneys grew, as you would expect. Kidneys get bigger and bigger in polycystic kidney disease. In the ketogenic diet group, they shrank. So this was actually very unexpected. I wouldn't have thought we get a decrease there. But that's the data. For the eGFR, the kidney function, in the control group, the kidney function worsened just a little bit, kind of stayed the same, if you will, over that period of time. In the ketogenic diet group, it actually improved. It increased. So the numbers are still being crunched. I believe this was actually statistically significant here, which was really amazing. That nobody would have thought that would be the case. The study is being put together as a manuscript right now, and should hopefully come out in a few months as a paper, so everybody can see it.
Yeah, and I love Dr. Muller's research because he is an incredible critical thinker, and he's really good at avoiding confirmation bias, and he's very, very good at being also critical of his own approach. You'll hear him talk about the paper and say where the shortfalls were and what you can extrapolate. And I think that really shows a lot of value for him as a researcher. And when he gets behind something, you can pretty much guarantee it's a great approach, because he really, really is smart and really looks at the research very, very carefully. I've been in many conversations where he will pick it apart, and just really, really impressive to me that he can think through the science on that level. So it'll be a great paper. I'm really excited for that one to come out.
Right, yeah. And it's they have a terrific team. They're doing lots of clinical trials. They have actually the largest AD-PKD registry in Europe. So they have the largest number of PKD patients at the University Hospital in Cologne there. So it's an amazing place. And I happen to be from Cologne. It's my where I grew up and came from. So that's how I got to know those folks, because every time I go there, we hang out, and of course we meet at conferences too. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Maybe we could do throw in a question from Heidi. What is the focus of the current clinical trial? Ketogenic diets, a Ren.Nu program combination, or something else? So, as we kind of talked about, we actually have a whole bunch of different clinical trials that we're working on, but really the two main ones, Toronto and Tokyo, they focus on exactly the Ren.Nu program. So nothing really changed. So the current Ren.Nu program that is currently running, and where cohorts go through, is exactly the program that will be tested in those trials, which means that patients that enroll into those trials, they will go for the same online training, the remote training, dietitian-led, learning how to do a plant-focused, kidney-safe ketogenic diet, how to self-monitor things like blood pressure, blood glucose, ketones, and so on. And it takes 3 months, right, from start to finish to go through the training. And at the end of these 3 months, usually patients are really up and running, and they know how to juggle their diet, because they also learn everything. They learn the ins and outs, what is oxalate, how do you read food labels and look out for phosphate, what are purines, how do you keep your uric acid low, how do you normalize and keep your urine pH at a good level, how to use KetoCitra in all of this to help out with. So then all the patients will go through the same program, and then they will be followed up for another 9 months, so a total 1 year intervention. So that's exactly the focus of those studies there. Did I forget anything?
And one thing that's great about how this is rolling out, so we have a trial up in Canada, right? And that really represents, to me, a lot about North American culture, dietary habits. Running the same program in Japan, we have to make some significant alterations to the food because there are things we use that they don't use regularly there. So we're having to make some pretty significant cultural adjustments. And what's going to be awesome is that because you have like the same approach being used in two different places, but based on the same principles, you can look at both of those and be able to find where commonalities are working for people or not working for people. And I think that there is going to be a lot of great science and a lot of great knowledge we'll be able to pull from them. So I'm really happy that we're running it in two totally different populations, two very, very different cultures, but based on the same principles. Because if the principles, drive success for patients, just based on principles, that in my opinion, holds a lot of weight. But there's a lot of work on our side.
Right.
A lot of great dietitians. And I will say, to run the program, like what is involved in these protocols, you cannot take an entry-level run-of-the-mill dietitian and have them run the program right now. The therapy takes a clinician that has some advanced practice skills and some knowledge base. And we've trained multiple dietitians on using this approach, but it takes some time to train them. And so being able to have really good dietitians and being able to train them is good. In fact, this March cohort, which we're signing up for right now, people can go apply for. This March cohort, the dietitian who will be our Japanese American dietitian, this is her training cohort. So she'll have a couple participants and she'll be followed by Kelly Welsh, who's a coordinator right now, really closely. But this will be her time to train. And so, every person who goes through Ren.Nu, they honestly are pioneers in setting the stage for hundreds of other people to be able to receive the therapy and for us to make the therapy better. And I think that's it's really cool to me that the PKD community, they always pay it forward, right? They do something for themselves, their health, their nutrition, and it ends up being great for someone else. But that does be good, but some work for the clinicians to get trained.
Right. Yeah, good. Maybe let me, if anyone has a question, please put down a comment and we'll try to answer it. There must be some burning questions, but I wanted to highlight Emily, who says hello. Emily is actually on the Santa Barbara Nutrients team, and she's just absolutely awesome. Emily's our clinical research manager, has been with us exactly 1 year, March 1st. So congratulations, Emily. Emily is really amazing and keeps all these clinical trial, the planning up and running and on track.
Details and planning on track. Yeah, a big shout out for her.
So it's, I think without Emily, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are right now. And we would be just struggling getting anything off the ground. So sometimes it really takes a special person to make a difference there.
There's very few supplement companies like medical food, like Santa Barbara Nutrients, that part of their team is a research coordinator. That's actually quite unusual unless they're a very, very big organization. So I think it says something about the heart of Santa Barbara Nutrients that they want to be, as a benefit corporation, you guys want to be able to drive the science. And I think that's awesome. And Emily is as the best of the best. So it's been so helpful for us in making sure we don't get off track.
Yeah. And that's one other good point you made is, usually a big pharma company, they literally have hundreds and hundreds of people that are involved in clinical trials that they do for their drugs. So we at Santa Barbara Nutrients, we don't make drugs. We make very cheap medical foods. We have one person, but it happens to be the most awesome person. So that's why we can do what we're doing, I think. And it's essentially insane what we're doing, and because we're such a small company, the number of clinical studies we're gearing up to do is just, I think it's unheard of. I don't think there's any company of that size, and same with Kidney Nutrition Institute, but we're doing this all together. I don't think there's anything else out there that would do what we're doing. So kind of a little bit proud of that. Yeah. Good. So again, put questions down there. Let me see if there's, I saw something from Captain Steve here. Captain Steve says, I'm trying to convince my nephrologist to use me as a case study. Clean keto, intermittent fasting, and KetoCitra is working great for me. That would be fantastic if your nephrologist wants to just write a case study paper. I would be, if your nephrologist is struggling with something and would want to talk to me, for example, for anything, I'm most happy to help them out with anything.
Yeah. And he doesn't have to be the only one who writes a case study either. So
right, yeah.
if he, and they're quite busy, right? But like that's something that can be done by other clinicians. So
right, yeah.
Awesome.
Right. So, and it might be a good way for your nephrologist to get a paper out of this. Maybe it's someone who hasn't recently done a lot of research papers. This you might be a really good case to write about. Great. Let's see. Let's see. Here's a question from Oscar. Hello, is there any way to reduce cyst size in kidneys? Well, we wish we knew, but so what we're measuring in those clinical trials that are coming up is total kidney volume, and that's done by MRI scanning. So I think most people are probably familiar MRI scanning, where it's this big tube, your whole body goes in, the person goes in, they get scanned, you get a 3D image of the kidneys, and you can then actually quantify the total kidney volume. And that is a measure of progression. We could also, there are ways to look at individual cysts, at least the larger ones. So that's something we might be able to see individual cysts, do they shrink? But usually total kidney volume is kind of what people are aiming for. So we will know, we will find out. Let me put up, let me see if I have this here. I could, for some reason I don't have it. I thought I did. We have a paper that just came out. Oh yes, here maybe. Let me just show you that. Present. This is my screen here. So there is this paper. Reset PKD, just a tiny pilot trial. Again, this was done, let's see, that's my name, but this was really done with Roman Muller and his team and Franziska Grundmann, where the tiniest pilot study, just a small handful of patients, I think like 10-ish, they were put on water fasting. Let me see if we have this here. 3-day water fasting versus ketogenic diet, only 5 patients each, to see if there are any fast-acting changes in total kidney volume or total liver volume. And there wasn't really a change in total kidney volume, at least not statistically significant. There was a change in total liver volume, but that is probably due to glycogen, one of the carbohydrate stores. Anyway, so it's definitely on everyone's radar to look at a change in total kidney volume. This study was just too small and too short to actually show that. But we're hoping, of course, that the larger studies are going to show that.
Yeah, and Toronto has I'm just trying to remember, I know I met him when we were up there, but they have the person who has that exceptional type of scanning, right? I'm going to say it all wrong, but like his imaging ability and the what they put into it is better. That's my short brain understanding from before, and then we'll be able to utilize that in Toronto, which will give us a really, really like a better idea on total kidney volume in particular, because there's some problems with classic MRI and total kidney volume.
So for the Toronto study, you're absolutely right. Like working together with the Mayo Clinic, they're really world's experts in squeezing the most out of MRI scans you can possibly do. So not only total kidney volume, but also cyst volume, plus even the abdominal fat, the visceral fat tissue. So all this can be measured there. Let's see, Paula asks, is ketosis necessary, or does total kidney volume decrease with reduction of carbs? Again, good question. So I guess the question is, does just like a regular low carb diet that doesn't really push you in ketosis yet, is this good enough? Nobody knows the answer. The clinical trial has not been done yet. My hunch is it won't be done for quite a while. We're talking probably at many years before somebody can do this head to head. So we're just trying to give it our best shot, so to speak. Right? So we're just trying to use the approach we think has the highest chance of seeing the most efficacy. And then if somebody wants, after that, once we have established that, if somebody wants to kind of titrate down and see, okay, if we take this away, that away, is it still working? That would be great. But we definitely want to start big and first want to make sure we get the best possible effect.
The science can stop in its track if you start at the lowest level. You say, oh, like reduction in carbs didn't do anything. So like this whole approach is like, man. And you're like, well, what about, like they weren't actually in ketosis, and maybe it's ketones, maybe that, so I like that you said that you start with the most aggressive approach. And if you get an outcome, good, like awesome. That tells you something. And then you can start stepping back and say, well, maybe it was just KetoCitra because it does all these other things. So let's take away the diet and we'll just do KetoCitra. Or like, then let's take away ketosis and just be low carb. And all that, so I think that all those questions will be answered with time. But if we can at least have approach that gives progress, that is very, very important. So the science doesn't get kind of buried under ineffective approaches.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Lori is asking a question. Let me first just remind everyone there's no medical advice being dispensed here, of course, right? So, but everybody has their own doctor. Everybody is different. Everybody has their own comorbidities, other diseases, that might pile up on polycystic kidney disease in different situations. So please don't take anything you hear here as medical advice. We're just strictly talking about research right now, clinical trials and so on, and where it all stands. And Lori is asking, any suggestions for a patient with a GFR of 20? What would you say, Jess?
So when you get to those lower GFRs, and we have worked with people's GFRs as low as 6, it is a good idea to work with a professional and make sure you've fleshed out where your risk factors are so you can get a good approach in place. The thing that we don't know yet, which will be interesting to study in the future, is if there's one question: can you shrink cyst size? I know we're almost at time, so I'll be brief. Can you shrink cyst size? Like in the animal models, that's one thing. Can you reverse fibrosis? That can happen with cyst growth and causes kidney decline also. That's another question. And so those are two different areas. And for lower GFR, it's a really important question because there would likely be more scarring or fibrosis. And so that can impact how much gain you might be able to get back. But we don't know. We've worked with lower GFRs at Kidney Nutrition Institute frequently. The Ren.Nu program caps at 25 because it is a group program. We have standardized menus. There's some personalized application with the dietitian, but there can be more risk factors than we would feel comfortable managing at the lower GFR in a group program. So we have patients at those lower GFRs do one-on-one with our clinicians. And just it's a personalized experience because there just can be a lot more things to consider.
Okay.
Your kidney function. But there is no harm for sure in managing oxalates. There's no harm for sure in starting to bring down carbs. Like I don't see any risk factors with that. There's no harm in making your diet more alkaline and getting more vegetables in. Like those are all really important things that you can do, switching to whole foods. You know, I just taught a class about this last night. Like there are some very simple things everyone can do that can at least sustain kidney function or lengthen the amount of time till someone would get on dialysis. And I'm really, really confident that that's possible.
Okay. And actually one thing to suggest for anyone at later stage PKD is take a look at a live video here on YouTube. We did just a couple months ago or so with Dwight Otland, who is the the director of the Los Angeles chapter of the PKD Foundation, and he also happens to be a friend and a team member in Santa Barbara Nutrients. And the video there is all about what did he do once his GFR hit 20, and check it out. So you should be able to find it on YouTube under the live tab, because it was recorded live. So yeah, that's excellent. Let's see. Captain Steve says he's the head of a university program, I think referring to the doctor that might write a case study on you. That would be fantastic. Same thing, if the person has a question or a bunch of questions that I might be able to answer, happy to help. Captain Steve is also saying his largest cyst was 18 centimeter and it's now 10.3 centimeters on MRI after 3 years of doing all this. That's pretty amazing. That is very great. Actually, Captain Steve is elaborating more. I tracked it from 5 centimeter to 10 to 13 to 18 and back to 10. That's amazing. Okay. I should point out, as I think everyone with PKD knows, PKD is thought to be relentlessly progressing, but it's not a disease that spontaneously ever gets better. It only gets, unfortunately, only gets worse over time. So, and the clinical, the history of the disease, is extremely well documented. So there's like lots and lots of papers using lots and lots of patients, looking at their trajectories over time, and it's very clear what what happens to a patient. You can take a snapshot, a one time point at a certain age, whatever age it is that the patient is at. You measure their total kidney volume, and you can classify them into what's called a Mayo imaging classification, and can then estimate what the trajectory of kidney function decline will be, which can be sad, for a patient to know exactly, hey, when I'm hitting whatever 59 or something, I'm likely to have end-stage kidney disease. But that's something we're trying to change. We're trying to change that trajectory. Good. All right. So I would say, we're pretty much done at the hour. If there's no more question, what are we forgetting, Jess? Something else we haven't talked about?
I think that's it. I mean, I pulled up my notes as we were going through, and, we wanted to hit on what are we doing now? What does it look like to structure those? What are the trials about? I think we got through all of those. So I hope that people found that there was some help here, some updates for them, some exciting updates for them. And I really think that there's some great things in this time period right now where there's a lot more emphasis on preventative care in the kidney space, and will be more and more, is a really exciting time for people with PKD, because I think there will be more and more solutions come out, and that's just so incredible. Really, really incredible. So thanks for having me here tonight. It's been always a pleasure when I get to see you and chat with you about the science. So
absolutely. Yes. And there's definitely more to come. And Jess and I, and with Emily, and all the clinical investigators, we're literally on Zoom. I feel like I'm on Zoom with them every day of the week, and we're planning all these many different clinical trials, and it's just never ending until it's done eventually. So hopefully, hopefully we're done.
I don't. I mean, I'm not actually sure that until it's done is a realistic statement.
Okay, yeah,
So there will always be another one.
Right. Well, at least we will get data, results, we'll publish
That's right.
them,
Until
and then
we
the
have
next
more
study will
data.
Right.
We're done with these ones.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Feel free to send a link to anyone you know with kidney disease who might be interested in learning a little bit more about upcoming clinical trials. Shoot them the link so they can watch it later. They won't be able to ask questions live anymore, missed their chance, but I guess they can always join a couple of Facebook groups where there's lots of discussion going on. There's one that's sort of administered by Jessianna, that's called PKD Nutrition, and then 25 other words after that.
We call the group with the long name.
Yes, so PKD Nutrition, I think if you look at that in Facebook, you'll find it. And then my group is called just Weimbs Lab, and then a bunch of other things, but should be easy to find as well. Everyone is welcome to join those and ask questions there. So hopefully people will, answer them there. Great. Okay, Jess, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Great being here.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.